You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
JT, Parker Ranger here, both Locked On Cougs and Locked On Utes crossing over. Last year, these two teams played, and Houston, who would spend part of the season ranked number one in the country and had a future NBA guy at point guard and returns a lot of last year's roster, honestly, struggled on this one at different points to cover the three-point line, including, as I pulled the box score to make sure I had this number right, Gabe Madsen getting loose for 8 of 15 from behind the arc. This team is not last year's team. You've covered this program.
Only
for a while
three
now.
guys back. Only 3 guys back from last year's team.
Only 3 guys back, which is comforting to me, except that one of them is Gabe Madsen. Lawson Loverling, also what it's worth, had the third most points on the team last year in that contest. I mean, are you going to tell me that Brandon Carlson is that important? Like what's the thought there?
Yeah, well, Brandon Carlson was one of the best. I mean, over the last 5 years, was overall this team's best player during that span. Was a part of a lot of games and memories, and got an extra 5th year because of COVID. That actually contributed in one of the Thunder's recent wins against like the Cavs, I think it was too. So fun to see him do things in the NBA. But yeah, they miss him. But they have added other guys, having like Lawson back another year in the system, I think has helped. And you get a little more. The one thing that always hurt with Carlson was he wasn't much of a stretch shooter. He would do it at times. Like that wasn't his specialty. And you get even more athletic, even though he was an athletic 5. Like they would try and play him and Lawson together. So you're asking a lot of Brandon Carlson. So new team, they shoot even more threes, as we kind of mentioned earlier. But this is, last year you catch Houston by surprise. If Utah had lost all their games leading into this, like that would be different. I mean, they lost 4 in a row before this recent 3-game winning streak. So they're obviously not going to be catching the Cougars by surprise. And it's going to be tough. I mean, you just look at the difference in like Utah allows 70 points per game. Houston only allows 55. That's where that number makes me nervous. But there's hope for Utah. I mean, Utah does move the ball a little better than Houston, 19 assists compared to 13. So that gives me some optimism there. Yes, you've won 10 games in a row. So obviously another big differential by that standpoint. But if you're Utah, you couldn't ask to be playing much better basketball right now, and at least some positive momentum going into what right now is, I think it is their toughest game. Well, I guess they played Iowa State too, but like one of your easily top 3 toughest games on the season. I'm glad it's coming when you're on a winning streak, instead of me coming on here having to convince myself, well, like, hey, Utah's lost 8 in a row, so at least they won't catch, like they won't see us coming. Like that's not what I have to tell myself.
Well, talk to me. What kind of question? You mentioned Craig Smith's been there 4 years. There's questions about how much longer he'll be there potentially, and expectations and all that kind of jazz. What kind of questions has Craig Smith got right now? I mean, he's got a pretty big task. He got an extra day to get ready, I guess, kind of, right? I mean, what's going through his head right now?
I think Craig Smith's thing, it's not about you want to be competitive against Houston. I don't think if they lose to Houston, that doesn't, you're supposed to lose to Houston, right? Like Utah basketball, no matter who the coach is supposed to lose to Houston. I think what you would love to have happen though, is Utah makes this a game like they did last year. And that early in the season, when you do something like that, you're building optimism. It was a disappointment for Utah to miss the tournament last year. They started the year and looked like they would end up in the NCAA tournament, but they did not. And that's your goal if you're Utah, is I think you just want to build optimism. I think Craig Smith's whole goal this year is to prove he's the right guy to lead this program going forward. I think what's really challenging about that is I don't see this team making an NCAA tournament. So how do you just get close like you did last year? And even though you missed it, it was like, well, last year's team on paper was even more talented. So maybe it shows like, hey, this is an even more impressive coaching job. It's going to be tough because everyone wants to make the NCAA tournament, but you're probably not going to do that this year with the contract coming up. I think he's in an incredibly tough spot. I actually think he's a really good coach. Is he the greatest recruiter? Maybe that's not the case, but it's also hard to recruit because it's more so what you do in the transfer portal. Have all the transfer portal additions always hit? No, they haven't. I think he's a very good in-game coach, but obviously all the additions haven't paid off. What can Utah basketball realistically do as a program? I think your goal is like every couple years to make the tournament. They haven't made the tournament since 2017. Larry Krystkowiak didn't do it. Craig Smith didn't do it. So like, this is not a, they didn't. You could, unfortunately, I wish that I was wrong, Parker, but
that was surprising to me. I think of like the Kyle Kuzma kind of times and all that kind of stuff.
That's the last team that did it. It's Kyle Kuzma. A long time ago.
I wouldn't have thought it'd been that long ago. And truthfully, I guess I feel like there's hype around the BYU thing, and obviously they're like very different places. But I feel like if you can get people to Provo, you should be able to get people to Salt Lake. There's a different appeal to BYU, though. I guess it's a different place, but
Yeah, BYU basketball has been better as of recently. Utah's actually beat them a lot. That's what's kind of funny. Like Utah has several upsets against them, but they are usually upsets. Like BYU usually comes into the game favored, and Utah obviously had success. I mean, BYU had success in the WAC before for basketball, but now in the Big 12, your hope is if you're Utah, you can try and pass them up. I just think for whatever reason, I'm trying to like for BYU, they have a better basketball game day atmosphere. There's no doubt about that. And that's where Utah's become a football school. And when you become BYU is they're more well-rounded than that at football and basketball, I'd say, but Utah is more a football school and the basketball just hasn't been there as much. So the state of Utah basketball wise has produced some good players. Most of those guys are at BYU right now. So that's where you're also at a little bit of a disadvantage. And once again, Utah fans listening, don't only like, oh, the Utah high school basketball talent is good. There are good players in the state, but there are not a lot we see leaving to go to D1 schools. And the best of the best, like there's a guy, Brody Kozlowski, he's at USC right now. So the best of the best, you can't even, those guys end up going off. They did get one recent player, but I think those things have hurt Utah as you're not the team in your state.
And they have the Wasatch Academy program. It's like a high school academy type deal, but those kids are not always from Utah.
They go to BYU. That's Caleb Lohner. Before he made his way to Utah, he started his career at BYU.
And Houston's got a great 2025 commit in Isaiah Harwell, who's at Wasatch Academy, right? But I was going to say is they get kids.
Thank you guys for stealing another one. Thank you.
Well, if they're not from Utah, though, they're not going to have the same connection. The same way like every Montverde kid doesn't go to Florida, right? Like that's not how that goes.
I want a better basketball team.
It's a fun thing. I understand that, you thought the football program had a good couple of years, right? I get all that. That's me rubbing it in. I'm too nice. That's me rubbing it in.
Not used to being a Big 12 bottom dweller like you guys were last year. Great for me.
Hey, as you have seen, and as we opened with, as Arizona State showed all of us, it doesn't have to last long.
True. It's true. That's the hope.
That's our full circle moment. Now we've got an extra day to get ready for this game, so we're gonna be talking more about it on Locked On Cougs as well as whatever transfer portal stuff, and if we hear more on spring and practices, and if stuff gets frozen over or whatever's going on at the University of Houston between now and Wednesday. JT, what else you got on the docket this week? Because you got an extra day between the basketball game now here.
Yeah, I do have an extra day between the game, but honestly, I'm feeling confident, Parker. I'm ready to make my prediction right now. And I believe that Utah is going to lose to Houston. I think they're going to put up a fight, though. I actually think they keep it within. I think they're doing some good things. Like, I think this game I think Houston will lead by 20 for a lot of it. And then Utah will make a late kind of run and they'll stay within 15. So I think we'll leave feeling semi-optimistic about Utah. But yeah, overall, I think Houston's the better team. For Locked On Utes this week, we're just going to be talking the latest with transfer portal news, rumors. We'll have players declaring for the draft, any kind of leftover ones. It's the last week to do it, I think, to gear up for the Senior Bowl. So always new things going on in college football and always a lot to learn about the Big 12 Conference, Parker, which me and most Utah fans are delighted to be in.
Yeah, not the vocal ones on the internet. As far as a prediction goes, I will say I think it's also going to be a weird game, and this is where we'll get out of it. Having a small home crowd that I'm anticipating with the weather, throwing it off a day, playing it a day later, and Utah making a rather large number of threes per game, it does kind of yield for a weird – I'm not going to predict an upset, but I think whatever you see the line as, and it's been taken down and not published because the game has been bumped today, I would say it's probably closer than most people will be. But I'm still picking the Cougs. JC also picked the Cougs, so I don't feel so crazy there. You can find us both wherever you get your podcasts each and every day. Also have live reactions or next day reactions and all that kind of stuff and all that kind of fun stuff to dump in the comments as well. This has been and always will be a Locked On crossover edition between Locked On Cougs and Locked On Utes. Thanks for making us your first listen today. If you're a basketball person, Locked On College Basketball is a whole show dedicated to basketball all the time. Go check that one out for your second listen. Thanks again, and go Cougs, JT. Go Cougs.